Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 21st of June. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm with Craig Isherwood, the leader of the Citizens Electoral Council. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, we are doing an update on what we covered last week with the plan to bring in bail-in Australia. So the first item is derail the secret bail-in legislation train. Second, next phase of global meltdown underway. Watch out for war. And finally, the only way to stop the Coles Woolies extortion racket is to scrap national competition policy. So first, derail the secret bail-in legislation train. And Craig, we did a follow-up release this week on the fact that from our digging, what was reported in the Financial Review on the 3rd of June as a proposal, which you know we'd caught wind that was more than a proposal, it was being actually worked out. But what was reported as a proposal, we now know the Financial Stability Board, which is the branch of the Bank for International Settlements that's dictating the depositor stealing regime for the world, on the 15th of April, you got the report there,
It's
I
the
believe.
report here, yeah, that's it, underlined there, Robbie, black and white for people.
You care to read that out?
Yeah, it's under findings from the first thematic peer review of the National Resolution Scheme.
This is the 15th of April this year.
Yeah, there's a whole process been going on, Robbie, for a couple of years now, whereby you have these things called key attributes, which are special resolution powers that are supposed to be imposed into regulatory authorities inside countries to deal with the fact of a collapse of a bank.
Yep.
And it's all based upon this premise now these days that there's these globally systemically important financial institutions, GSIFIs they call them, that are too big to fail.
And domestic ones as well.
Well, that's the important thing, is because there's a whole, we'll come to that later, but the point is what these key attributes specify is that banks should have these bail-in powers. So we're talking about what we've seen in Cyprus being brought to Australia. And what it says here is that is talking about it is critical that authorities have a broad range of powers at their disposal when faced with a crisis. This is not the case in all FSB jurisdictions.
That means member states of the FSB, which Australia is one of.
That's right. Such jurisdictions, resolution authorities still lack the powers set out in the key attributes to achieve rapid transfer of assets and liabilities and to write down debt of a failing institution or convert it into equity, that is bail-in, although legislation is in train in some jurisdictions, including Australia, Brazil, the EU, France, Germany, Indonesia, Singapore and South Africa, to align national regimes fully with key attributes.
So that's the smoking gun, if you will, that we know that they're reporting among themselves outside of Australia, the people who are plotting this, that legislation is already in train, that's the term for Australia. So we've put out a release saying what legislation, how, and Craig, the alarming thing is in this period, this is the 21st of June, so we're right in the middle of the last fortnight sitting of Parliament before the election. And there's something like 200 pieces of legislation they're trying to ram through in a fortnight.
Yeah.
Now, no one in Parliament is going to read that legislation. Nobody. And they can therefore easily sneak this through. And that's how they like to do it, because we know that in the case of the Dodd-Frank Act. So just to remind viewers, in 2010, Obama, who, you know, the gloss hadn't quite worn off him by then, and a lot of people just accepted what he did, and they just assumed that Obama would not let the banks get away with murder from the global financial crisis. And so this bill was put up called the Dodd-Frank Act, 800 pages long, that was supposedly to re-regulate the banks, and a big deal was made about the re-regulation of the banks. It turned out to be a whole fraud. The whole point of the bill was to stymie any efforts to go back to a Glass-Steagall banking separation. And inside the 800 pages is the provisions for bail-in powers for the US banks. And a lot of congressmen over there now who voted for Dodd-Frank, because they didn't read it, they just voted for it, who are actually supporters of Glass-Steagall, bitterly regret what they did.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, Rob, because according to the FSB, who are whining about the fact that at the present time there's only 3 countries that have so-called bail-in powers, and that is Switzerland, Spain and the United States through the Dodd-Frank bill.
Yep.
And that's, I mean, they're whining about it because, look, if you have a look at the Australian banking situation, right, we've got 4 big banks. And what I found also stunning in doing a lot of work, background work to this, is that on the September the 11th of all dates, 2009, Wayne Swan crowed from the rooftops that he was going to have a guaranteed deposit scheme called the Financial Claims Scheme. And this was going to cover 99% of all deposits. Unfortunately for Wayne Swan, he was lying, because 10 days later, the same Financial Stability Board came out and said it wasn't possible for the Financial Claims Scheme to cover the big 4 banks. Now, we're talking about $393 billion of deposits just in the Commonwealth Bank alone, Robbie. We're talking about 200 trillion thereabouts of deposits. Remember, you've got all these superannuation funds with $1.4 trillion. Where's that money? Well, a lot of that's in the banking system as well. So here you have 4 too big to fail banks, according to the FSB's own language, here in Australia, that are not covered by the Financial Guarantee Scheme. So how does this work? Well, according to the literature I've read from the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, they have 2 main powers. The first is what's called open resolution, and the second is called closed resolution. The Financial Claims Scheme, Robbie, only comes in under the second one, the closed resolution scheme.
Which means when a bank is wound up.
Literally, they're going to wind that bank up. But the Commonwealth Bank, the ANZ Bank, Westpac, they can't wind them up. They're too big, right? So they're going to go to open resolution. And this is literally where the APRA can step in. It's got a massive powers. It can appoint statutory managers. In the case of insurance companies, it also looks under judicial managers. It can create what's called bridge banks, like literally overnight, through the collaboration with ASIC and APRA, they can create, register a bank, shift certain assets out of that failed bank and keep the thing going. Because they don't want to use the Financial Claims Scheme, because that means that the government then has to foot the bill.
Put up the money which we won't have.
Yeah, it's $20 billion appropriated from the Treasury via the Treasurer under the closed scheme that can be used to literally so-called pay out the depositors. But the government is broke. The government doesn't have this money.
So APRA's already got enormous powers, but they specifically need the bail-in powers where they can say, okay, we're going to grab the deposits now to achieve this.
Under the open resolution of keeping the banks open, that's the only solution they've got. Big 4 or any others say, okay, well, you guys that have got deposits in, you're going to take a haircut, just like in Cyprus. We're going to shift your deposits. We're going to give it, which is actually a liability, Robbie, because depositors are actually referred to as unsecured creditors. In other words, when you put your money into the bank says, basically writes you out an IOU. We owe you this amount of money. So there's a liability there. But if they can't pay that liability back, what they're now seeking with these bail-in powers is to say, okay, well, we don't owe you
that much.
We don't owe you that much anymore, because we're going to give you these shares. And this was done in Spain about a week ago, and these so-called shares are worth about 2 cents in the dollar compared to what they were before the bail-in powers were applied. Yep. So this is basically, as we've said very clearly, a pure looting scheme. And you have to look at this, Robbie, in the context of the entire global financial crisis, where you see there's this mountain of speculative unpayable debt. Just in derivatives alone, we're talking about $1.4 quadrillion of these speculative instruments that can't be paid. The debt can't be paid, and that's why we've got to have a Glass-Steagall reintroduction of Glass-Steagall, particularly under the specification that Mr. Lyndon LaRouche has requested, or campaigned for, I should say. Yep. Otherwise, look, this is literally going to destroy the very fabric of every economy, as we've seen in Cyprus, where 70% of the economy's disappeared.
So we know what the solution is, but Craig, what we need to talk about now, for the sake of the viewer, is how the people watching this show can get involved, because we do have an opportunity to stop this. The only hope they have to get it through is secretly. And it's entirely possible, this kind of, under these circumstances, that Wayne Swan and Joe Hockey, in his pinstripe suit with his wife, who's a superstar derivatives foreign exchange trader for Deutsche Bank, who's going to do what the banks want to do, they can get together and just make an agreement among themselves and tell their colleagues this has to be voted for, and their colleagues wouldn't even know what they're voting for. So that's the only way they can do it. We can stop it by shining a spotlight on it. So just to brief the viewers, we've been calling everybody, we've been calling the media, we've had radio interviews, etc. We are making a big stink, But what else can people do? I'm suggesting, and we've been suggesting to people, that on our press release we say call those officers, call your local Member of Parliament who's in Canberra this fortnight, your federal Member of Parliament, demand that they ask about it. Call Wayne Swan's office, demand that they report what they're doing, and call Joe Hockey's office to demand that they report what they're doing. And if we can get enough of those kind of calls going into Parliament at the moment, they won't be able to get away with it, will they?
No, they won't, Robbie. Look, the point is we've got tens of thousands of flyers. We've had our printing presses here run flat out for a week now, just producing flyers for people to get out amongst the banking community, amongst businesses, about everyone. We want everyone to know about this. This cannot be allowed to see the light of day, this legislation. And look, you're right. Most of the politicians in there are blind.
Yep.
They don't read the stuff. They take advice as per what they think is the right way to go. They read the key explanations of bills. No, we haven't as yet found anything tucked away in legislation, but you see the general directionality of these Financial Stability Board key attributes being embedded in Australian legislation. So unless people get up off their hind horses and really fight this now, we're going to see, look, well, I can see there's the very possibility, as you say, of sweet deals done behind the scenes by the bankers through their various channels. Look, we always talk about, and we've got a long history of talking about the money power centred in the City of London. This is what the Labor Party used to talk about. You know, we also talk about the international Freemasonry of central banking. That's what's at play here. This is what you're talking about with the Financial Stability Board and its spin-off, the Bank of International Settlements, which is a Nazi bank. It was designed and supported Hitler. We've got the history of this down in black and white. Franklin Roosevelt wanted to get rid of this horrendous thing. Unfortunately, he died, and Truman came in and kept the thing going. So look, Robbie, this is the way that the global financial oligarchy is going to smash through bail-in, through secret legislation, the sovereignty of nations, and it's going to mean that people will die from this. And you only have to see and read the comments coming out of Greece right now, where they're shutting down, huge numbers of hospitals. I saw 32 hospitals being shut down, schools are being shut down, police forces are being cut in half. All these sorts of things are happening in these countries where these austerity measures are being put in place. That's what's coming to Australia, particularly when you see the collapse of our trade at the present time, the collapse of the dollar and all the other things that are going on.
So if you're someone who's read history and thought, well, if I lived in the time of the Nazis, I would have fought them to the death, well, you have an opportunity to, because it's history repeating itself. So we'll put up on our screen the phone number for the Parliament that people can call straight away and ask for their Member of Parliament. I also suggest, Craig, people go and see their local bank manager, because those are the poor guys that if this goes through and people start demanding their deposits, be told they're not going to get them, they're the ones that are going to be in the firing line. So warn everybody you know at that level. We better stop there. We're out of time. When we come back, though, we're going to talk about how this is not an academic exercise, because the next phase of the global meltdown is underway. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Next phase of global meltdown underway. Watch out for war. Now, there's two images, Craig, I think, from this week I want people to compare. One is the stock market report from today. Today's the 21st of June. We woke up to find there's been a 350-point drop on the Dow Jones, which is, we're getting into 2008 territory again when the drops are getting that big. The other one is the picture of Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin in Ireland, ice cold, right? Because what they're doing is the Cold War is being revived over the question of Syria, and the problem is it's not going to be a Cold War for long. It'll get very hot.
Putin's intervention, Robbie, was really, really to the mark. I mean, because here you have Obama coming out now saying we're going to arm the Syrian rebels, and to paraphrase Putin, he says that is disgusting. You're saying and he's basically said in this language to Putin, you're saying that you're going to fund the rebels who happily will kill someone on camera, open them up, and eat their intestines. They're the sorts of people that you intend to fund? Well, I don't think that's very tolerable. And you can imagine how that went down, because that initially wasn't reported in the US, but then it was reported because, I mean, it was such a disgusting picture that they could not report it.
The world actually owes Putin and the Russians a debt of gratitude here, because if it wasn't for them constantly questioning every step of this policy, we would find ourselves quickly in another war and backing people that for 10 years we've denounced as terrorists, or the Al-Qaeda network. Anyway, what's the driver? The economic issue is what's key here. What's happening with the economy is, and why the Dow went down, is because the Federal Reserve is in a damned if it does, damned if it doesn't position. It's been printing money for so long now, 4 years. It knows it can't continue, but it also knows it can't stop, because a couple of weeks ago it made noises that it might have to taper off the money printing, and the markets crashed. And then it said, oh, no, we won't taper it off. And then the markets panicked again, saying, what, are you saying we can't exist without it? So that made them crash again. And now, overnight, the Fed said, well, next year we're going to have to end this. And then the markets really panicked, and that's what why the Dow went down. What we've seen in the last little period, Australians are witnessing a very sharp collapse in our dollar. And the reason why is because money is fleeing Australia. There's been years of what's called the carry trade, where when the US Federal Reserve is printing money and the European Central Bank is printing money, this is money that's put out there at virtually no interest or very, very cheap interest. Speculators take it and they bring it to countries like Australia, Brazil, Thailand. They carry it there to seek a higher interest rate, right? That has all of a sudden reversed. And the last time this happened was September 2008, which is when our dollar plunged sharply again. And our banks were left high and dry because they need this cheap money. They're in so much debt overseas. They need this cheap money to keep rolling it over. A lot of this debt is on 90 days, as we've often blown the whistle on. So that's what we're witnessing happening. Last week, the US corporate bond market collapsed by 90%. People witness the stock market indices. This has its own index. 90% the corporate bond market went down. So the real danger here, and this is where the war comes in, is that you got the British and the US government under Obama. They are determined to block the only solution, which is Glass-Steagall. And if they're going to block the only solution, their only recourse, therefore, is to war. And you can see, Craig, they've redoubled their efforts in Syria to get that fuse lit.
Problem, Robin, now, this is not like World War II, right? This is not like World War I. This is now, we're looking at down the barrel at thermonuclear war, right? Because you're talking about Syria being aligned with Russia. Russia knows that they are the target. China knows that they're the target because they support this concept of national sovereignty. That they, given a chance.
Well, they insist on it.
Well, yeah, as Putin did this last couple of days. Now, the point is that if you have a Glass-Steagall, right, which is initiated in the US because we get rid of Obama, as Lyndon LaRouche is campaigning for, then immediately you're going to have a massive transformation in the world. People are going to say, we don't want this old system that's destroying our nation. We do want to go back to a system of re-regulation. We do want to go back to a system of supporting our currencies, of literally developing our nations.
And by putting governments back in charge of the system, it means you take away the power of the City of London.
And that's where the danger is for the City of London, and that's why they would prefer to go to war, even if it means the extinction of the human race, than lose that power. I mean, we're talking about the mindset of the gods of Olympus here, Zeus, right? You've got to think about these people not in the form of a compassionate human being, but madmen that are insistent on, if they don't have their way, then they'll prefer to die, right?
Yep.
And kill everyone rather than literally allow this power to go to where it belongs, and that is into the hands of national sovereign governments, as Putin has illustrated.
So they're pushing an imperial interest, and the other point I'll make is that what it shows you also is that with the way the economy is, the push for bail-in is not academic.
No.
It's because they know that our banks are going to need it very soon.
They can't get it from countries, they're going to steal it from depositors.
Yep. Okay. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Coles Woolies extortion racket. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So Craig, in the time we have left, let's talk about how the only way to stop the Coles Woolworths extortion racket is to scrap national competition policy. And the reason we're talking about this is this week, the independents Bob Catter, Andrew Wilkie and Nick Xenophon have put up a bill to force Coles and Woolies to sell half their stores. So there's more quote-unquote competitors, which is well-intentioned because they're reacting to a real problem, but it's not enough. And one of the reasons this is not enough is because they're buying into this idea of quote-unquote competition, when what we actually need to go back to is regulation. But I have an anecdote I want to recount. This week, an Australian food manufacturer told the CEC straight out that the Coles Woolworths agenda was not profits or anything like that.
Not down.
He said it was their agenda was to destroy Australian manufacturing, and he's dead on the mark.
So it was down.
Down for Australian manufacturing. And in his case, his product has just been removed from Coles' shelves because he hasn't changed his price for years, but they've demanded more and more and more until he finally said, no, you can't have any, I'm not going to take any less, I can't take any less. And then he told how in the ads, down with the big hand, the producer of those products that get featured has to pay to be on those ads, right? But then they also, it's the producer who has to absorb the discount, not Coles. Coles keeps its margin. So all the cost is worn by the producers. And of course, they're getting totally screwed. And he said, look, they want to destroy Australian manufacturers so they can just bring in everything cheap from overseas. So the real issue here is national competition policy, which Paul Keating and Macquarie Bank imposed on Australia back in 1991 on all parts of Australia. They got rid of all the regulations that kept local production going. I just want to give one aspect of it so people can see how this worked. Much is made in Australia of our low inflation. And economic historians say how Paul Keating's recession we had to have, you older people who remember this, that was good because it broke the back of inflation in Australia. Before Keating's recession, inflation was often between above 5%, sometimes above 10%, etc. And of course, that's a fraud. Real inflation is much higher than what they report. But they measure it in the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And what actually happened? Well, on the back of Keating's recession, his government slashed tariffs and introduced national competition policy. And that allowed a flood of cheap imports into Australia that filled the shelves of the shops. So all of a sudden there's those cheap prices. And it allowed outfits like Coles and Woolies to start screwing down Australian producers and forcing them to take less than their cost of production. And so the cost of this low inflation has been the wholesale massacre of domestic Australian production. That's what we're dealing with here. And that was the intention all along. And now people are getting sick of it. So it's only, you can pass bills to say, oh, you've got to, cut your number of shops and whatever. But isn't this one example, Craig, where the real issue is we have to reverse the agenda from the beginning and go back and start scrapping these laws?
These guys, good intentions, but you've got to go back and you've got to attack the heart of the beast, which is this question of globalisation, free trade, dereg, and as you said, the entire economic rationalist policy. For 25 years we've fought this, Robbie, and we've fought it on the basis that if the real issue is that you have to protect your domestic industries. This idea of allowing cheap manufactured goods or cheap produced goods in overseas and destroying your own domestic industries is a matter of national security. I mean, it's pure insanity.
It's an assault on our nation state's existence.
Right. I mean, if you don't have a nation, just do this, and look what's happening. We're losing. So you can't just tinker around with this and put a bit of legislation in here and tackle a couple of grocery stores here. You have to stand for this principle. Either you have a sovereign nation state that protects its people, protects its industries, brings back tariffs and has fair trade, good relations with other countries on the same basis, which we call the Treaty of Westphalia basis, the advantage of the other. Yep. Either you have that or you don't. And if you don't have it, you end up destroying your own economy and destroying your own people.
So the key thing here is to recognise, with all what we've talked about, there's an intention, and we've got to fight the intention. Don't fall for the lie that these things happen by accident.
It won't work.
All right, we've run out of time again. Call your Member of Parliament, your bank manager, and tune in next week for more CEC Report.